And we're on. So some of you will recognize this fella. So I one of the strange things that I never intended to do was get a whole bunch of people who knew nothing about the Christian Reformed Church fascinated by Christian Reformed Church synods, which is a very strange thing. But yet, here we are, and this is Herb, and Herb has been how many times have you gone to synod, Herb?
Five.
5 times. Okay. So I've gone more than
Yeah.
you have actually.
Yeah. No, I went 08, 15, 18, 22, and 23.
Okay. All right. And so we are going to talk about, well, we're mostly going to talk about Herb because part of what people who watch Senate don't, I think, generally appreciate is that what you see on the screen is like an inch deep. And even Synod, those advisory committees, actually, most Synod work is actually done in those advisory committees. And what happens on the floor sort of follows from that. And everybody on that floor has their own story. And anybody who watches my channel a lot knows that I enjoy learning people's stories. And as a pastor, that's a lot of what I do for a living. So Herb's getting sorted out here. He's had some help putting some things together, but
Yeah.
so Herb, tell me about the home you grew up in.
Actually, this is the house.
Oh, really? You're sitting in the house
Yes,
you grew up in.
I sit in the house I grew up in when my grandfather came as a teenage boy, rode the train down here from Pease, Minnesota, to take a job for the winter with a farmer at the Christian Reformed Church. Um, this house, if this was in the 1890s, I don't remember exactly what year. This house was here. This house was not a new house in 1890.
Wow.
And it has been added on to when my dad moved here in 1941. Then I don't remember for sure which years, but shortly after he moved here, him and one of his hired men, they dug out the cellar and blocked it up and raised it up and laid a basement under it and put some braces in so that the first floor has not suffered that badly from the fact that there was no code to say what the minimum size for floor stringers would be. Unfortunately, in the upstairs now, if you want to have a bookcase, you need to have two moderately sized paperbacks that you're never planning to read again to put under the bookcase so the bookcase won't tip over. So, one of the reasons that we're running around outside today is hopefully the first contractor is going to be here tomorrow, and we are going to be putting up in Iowa they call them houses. It's a shed house because we can't afford conventional housing anymore, so we're going to the shop type thing
Yep.
with
Yep.
just a floating and
Yep.
a varmint barrier. And so yeah, hopefully sometime this fall or winter we will be out of here, and then I'm going to spend the next year. We will spend the next year sorting, carrying stuff out, some to the new place and some to be disposed of, and then I will tear it down
Really?
because yeah, and I'm hoping that I'll get some grace and get some time and get some help because I would really like to tear it down piece by piece because um, there's a lot of full measure lumber in here. This was the old
Wow.
balloon frame with full 2x4 walls, and plus you never know what you're going to find in the walls of these old houses.
That's true.
And we found some when they remodeled the upstairs about 35 years ago and cut off the balloon framing above the floor and put a plate down and put a wall up and going through that when we were going through that too there was some interesting old newspapers and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I as long as there isn't pressure that it has to be torn down like from the insurance company or something, I kind of want to take my time and take it down carefully. So
Oh, that sounds like great fun. So, your father, what did your father do?
my father was a farmer. We in the last 15, 20 years, we got reconnected with some of the family in Holland, and the majority of the Schurers have been farmers since there was records written down about them.
Okay.
And his dad, my grandpa, Bert Schur, was actually born near Hardenberg in Holland, but then his father and his grandfather were born in Germany. These people seem to have a loyalty to Hardenberg, but they didn't really worry that much about which side of the border they were on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I
Well,
don't know. I imagine there was a time maybe, and then there wasn't a border. I don't.
yeah, borders are actually fairly modern things. People just sort of went where they went, and nations, you know, especially Germany was rather late to that whole game.
Yeah.
So, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have one brother. My dad was involved in a hunting accident when he was young, and one leg was shorter than the other. And so he was what in those days was known as a cripple. And I don't know how much of this was actually affected his ability to be married or his understanding of his ability to be married. But he got married when he was 44 and when my mom was 32.
Oh,
And so I was born when he was 45, and my younger brother was born when he was 47. And
okay.
my brother has an interesting story about that. This is how I know my brother loves me, because he told this story in a group that I was on the fringe of, so he knew I could hear it. He said that mom and dad had me, and they were looking at me for a while, and after about a year or so, they thought, you know what, we can do better. So they got pregnant again, and they had another baby. And then he says they looked at me for about a year, and they said, no, we can't. And there was no more children.
Oh my. Oh, that's a good story. That's a good
Yeah.
story.
So no, yeah, no, I have a younger brother, and him have kind of alternated farming this for a little while. And then in 86, he went, were you in California in 86?
Nope.
Oh, okay. There was a thing called the dairy buyout where the government bought out all the, I don't know if you were aware of that or not, but the USDA bought out all the small dairy farmers. And my brother kind of saw it as a sign that says from the government, there's not going to be any more small dairies. You can get out now with some cooperation and some money, or we will run you out. So he took the money, and then his wife was from the Chicago area, so they moved back to Chicago area and eventually settled in a little town called Kirkland, about halfway between Rockford and DeKalb, Illinois. So, so that's me and my sibling.
All right, and then you moved in, and well, growing up, Christian Reform, go to the Christian Reform Church.
Yes, yes. This was we have for whatever reason, this is some of the history that when you finally get old enough to be curious enough and brave enough to ask, there's nobody alive that knows it.
Yeah.
But where I go to church at now, right, Christian Reformed Church, my great grandfather Siemens was involved in founding that, and my dad and his two older siblings were baptized there, and then the family moved up back to Pease for a couple of years, and then they moved back to Iowa, and they still kept going to Wright Church, which I don't know if this was related or not, but Grandpa was always renting ground from his wife's uncles. Which, if you know, I'm going to throw a name out here for you that'll resonate. Bodies.
Okay.
The Grundy College Bodies.
Okay.
That was my great grandma's brothers. My great grandma was Bodies.
Okay.
And then anyway, in 1920, Grandpa bought a farm of his own that was about halfway between the town church and the country church. And Grandpa went to the town church. And my dad and three of his brothers who lived closer to Wright Church, we always all went to the town church also. So,
Okay.
so I kind of grew up with a history of driving by this church, and it was an interesting situation because when we finally started going there about 25 years ago, all of a sudden these people were our pastors. And before, we'd always had this relationship with them as neighbors because the church is only 3/4 of a mile from our house. And we just, you neighbor out in the country, you neighbor over one thing or another. And so it was kind of interesting to make the transition from having these people, knowing these people as neighbors, to also having them for your pastors.
Okay.
But
Um,
I've been involved in the 3 churches in this area because after we got married and we were living up by Britt, we went to the Britt church for about, I don't know, 12 or 14 years also. But,
okay.
so,
What are your memories of growing up in the Christian Reformed Church when you did? What stands out in your memory?
um, there was a lot of us, and we had our church was full when I was little, and we had big Sunday school classes. One thing I remembered, a kid that was in my grade in Sunday school, his dad got tired of his wife, and a neighbor lady got tired of her husband, and they were caught. And rather than repent and go back to where they belong, they went ahead and got divorces. And my dad was pretty good friends with this guy. This guy had been one of Dad's hired men, and I saw a little bit of hesitancy in my father about discipline after that, because there had been discipline cases before that went the way they were supposed to go. Some of them took a while, but they went the way they were supposed to go. And now all of a sudden he's an elder and he's trying to get repentance and reconciliation from this guy who he had really considered as a friend for 40 years of his life, and it ain't happened. And I think that was, I don't know what went on at other times in other churches, but I guess that is one uh, reason. I don't know if it's an excuse, but I think that's one reason why maybe discipline got diminished, because people, for a long time, it had tended to work in the way you wanted to work for the benefit of the individual members and also for the benefit of the church. And then all of a sudden got into the 60s, and this wasn't working like this anymore.
So that was in the 60s
Yes,
already.
that was in the early mid 60s.
Well,
And
a lot of things changed in the country in the 60s. And, people don't realize it, but changes that happen in the cities on the coast also, the United States is one country, and they also impact things that are going on in the farm country in the middle as well. And so, yeah, I think in the 60s, there were a lot of experiences that happened when people began to say, I wonder if the old ways are going to continue to produce the same results that they used to. And it's always kind of a mystery as to what's going on. It's never quite easy to see and to figure out.
yeah, yeah, because like I was born in 53, so I very clearly remember the day Kennedy was shot. I very clearly remember the day that Martin Luther King was shot. I was very clearly remember the day that Bobby Kennedy got shot. And you just uh, it stretches the anchor chain a little, or makes the anchor drift and makes the anchor drag a little. It just it's a really undeniable indicator of that things are not how you think they are, and they are not how you think they should be. And we're gonna have to try and figure this out.
Yep. Yep. So when was the first time you went on council in your church, and what was that experience like?
I think in the late, I don't know, maybe the mid 80s, I was a deacon at the Britt Church. And it went okay. Mike Menning was living in this area, or in southwest Minnesota, which we're about 100, 150 miles from. And he was going around doing deacon training. And I always really appreciated the time I got to spend with him. And and I guess the other thing, I had something emphasized to me that obviously enough people don't get emphasized to them. But when I was one of the first things that happened after the congregational meeting was an elder who was just a retail guy on Main Street, college dropout, took a corner and said, "Here's what the deal is." And this is really important because you're a deacon, and a lot of the people that we try to help are single moms. He says, Billy Graham rule: you never, ever be behind a closed door by yourself with a woman who is not your wife.
Yeah, yeah.
And he says, and I says, except, and he says, there ain't no excepts. He says, if you have to do stuff on the doorstep for them and walk away, you do that. He says, you do not go into that house by yourself. And it's just, I've had a couple, at least one synod where we had to deal with some of this kind of stuff, and you're going, what are these people thinking? What are these people thinking? I mean, that because you're a Christian, you can't sin no matter what situation you put yourself in. That's not quite how that works. That's why we are working at being Christians, and that's why we understand that we are not completely sanctified yet. That part of sanctification. I remember something Dad told me. Got in trouble at school one time because there was a disturbance, and I was not directly in the disturbance, but I was close enough to it that they got the phone call home. Which I don't know about you, but when I was in school, we'd have licked out urinals if we could have kept them from calling home. When they called home, you were done. You were just done. It was not whether you were going to get disciplined; it was how much. And I remember my dad telling me, he says, you know what? He says, you knew what was going to happen, didn't you? Says, yeah. But he says, you wanted to stick around and watch, didn't you? I says, yep. And he says, you got in trouble. I says, yep. He says, if you can't fix trouble and contribute to a solution and do it quickly, he says, you walk away. Because if there's nothing you can do, then don't be there.
That's good advice.
And so yeah, I remember that. We had Christian school, but we had Christian day school, kindergarten through 8, and we went across the street for high school. I guess one of my big memories of grade school was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I would have been about 3rd grade then. And we had enough geography that we knew where Cuba was from Kanawha, Iowa. And we also realized that if the Russians were going to attack America, they would attack the most important place first. And as far as we were concerned, Kanawha was the most important place. So we organized ourselves into 2 people would stand out at recess, every recess, and watch off to the south to see if there's any missiles coming.
You guys were planning ahead.
Yeah. So, and I mean, later you realize that, they weren't even checking if you were in the drift pattern.
Married kids.
Yes, I had an interesting thing happen. I had some girlfriends, and we behaved reasonably well, and I thought things were going someplace, and then they would make a life decision that I was not about where they were going to live or where they were going to move to, and I'm going, no, I've lived some other places already, and I choose Iowa. I'm not somebody that's in Iowa because I've never been anyplace else. I've been other places, and I thought they all made Iowa seem like a pretty good place. And I kind of gotten to the point where I wondered, I mean, my dad, I wasn't worried because I was like 25, 26 years old. My dad didn't get married till he was 44. And I thought my parents had a reasonably good marriage. We didn't, I don't know if it was as good as we saw it be, but it was, they did all right. They were happy they got married. And then my dad had mentioned a family in town that, interestingly enough, a Catholic family. But found out later that this family did have some history with my family when my grandpa George was first going to grade school and was trying to learn English while in a little country school. The lady that was going to be my wife, her grandpa stood up around the porch and kept the big kids from beating him up and picking on him because he was the crowd. And so my dad just mentioned to me that he says, what, they're good people. I says, I know. He says, I know they're Catholic, but they're good people. They work hard. I think they're raising their kids good. You ought to think about that. And I'm going, yeah, right, Dad. I'm not 18 anymore, but I ain't 30 yet either. And then when I was 26, my dad was having follow-up surgery from a gallbladder surgery and had a heart attack on the operating table and died. Mm-hmm. And so then some of these things that your dad says take on a little more importance. And I think whether you recognize it at the time or not, when your dad dies, all of a sudden the idea of getting married, carrying on the name, all that stuff gets a little more important.
Yep.
So I called this girl up and I asked her for a date, and she went out with me, and it was a tough date because we went to that George Burns movie. I love George Burns, but it was the one about where all his friends are dying.
Oh.
And that was a little jagged, but she was very understanding and asked me once if I wanted to leave, and I said no, I'll be okay, And got home and walked her to the door and got back in my car. And at that time in my life, I was probably sitting there digging around trying to find a cigarette. And she came back out the door and opened the door and gave me a kiss on the cheek because that's what her grandma had told her to do. So I thought, well, maybe I will call her up again. So, yeah, that would have been in April of 1980, and then in December of 82 we got married.
Okay.
And she is some younger than me, but I'm improved. My mom and dad were 12 years apart. My wife and I are only.
Okay.
So yeah, we got married, and I'm farming and doing and working for a guy on the side painting houses and stuff, and then. So we got married and had a baby, my oldest, Garrett Lee, and which was a really things you remember.
Oh yeah.
Any of you people out there that ain't had your first baby yet?
Yep, that is true.
You're holding that first baby. That is the most joyous and most terrifying at the same time moment you will ever have in your life. And for me, it was kind of bittersweet too because my dad wasn't there to share it. That was it. But I named him after my dad, so which I could do that. I could do that because Dad wasn't around to be called Garrett, so I could have a son called Garrett. Nobody get confused. So.
Yeah.
And I still called him Garrett Lee till he was probably about 30. But yeah, and then the man that I was renting my ground from passed away, and I couldn't get any more ground rented. So let's see, got married in 82, and Garrett was born in 83. So yeah, in the spring of 84, I was delivering Winnebagos, which is a part-time job that you can get up around here. And I had one going to Lubbock, Texas, and then taking a car from Lubbock down to Dallas, and then picking up another car in Dallas that was going back to Milwaukee. I took my wife and my child with me, And we stopped in Elk City, Oklahoma, because in '78, when I got done walking beans in the summer, about the 15th of July, I took off, went down to Oklahoma and worked in the oil field for about 3 months, and was going to go back, and then I broke my arm, and I broke my wrist, and I had a armpit cast, and they wouldn't let me back to work with an armpit cast. If I had an elbow cast, they'd let me come to work. But anyway, so I said, hey, because that was the '80s, it was early '80s in Iowa. Everything was, it was tough times. And I says, you know what? I says, I'm going to stop where Billy Joe used to live. And I said, if he ain't there, or if he don't want to talk to me, I said, that's as far as I'm going with him. But I said, I'm going to stop. So I stopped, and he goes, when can you come to work? I says, when do you need me? He says, well, a little bit yet. He says, I got a guy I got to run off, but he says, I don't like him. And he says, I'm trying to figure out a way to get rid of him. And if I can get rid of him, I want you to come to work with me. And so, yeah, that's fine. So we tootled around with our cars and stopped in Oklahoma City and filled out paperwork for Santa Fe Energy, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the whole Santa Fe Railroad and all that stuff. Probably owned by Warren Buffett now. But and they had they had said they had about 700 days of digging lined up, and to do a 20,000 foot hole, which is about how deep they were going in that part of the world. It takes you about 6 months, and then it takes you about a month to move. And so I thought, you know what, if they got 700 days of drilling lined up, that's 2.5 years. I could financially healed up here if I, work in a oil field for a couple, 3 years. So I don't know, a couple of weeks later, he called up and said that he had a place for me. And I got down there and went out to work and found out the reason he had a place for me was because a guy on another ship had done a no-no, and in the oil field you don't do no-nos. The oil field, the old joke is if you see a guy with 2 fingers and 3 toes, what do you call him? Lucky. Because he did something stupid and he didn't die.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotten better. I haven't been back around it since the early '80s, but I mean, you do what you're told, and you do it well, and you do it on time, and you pay attention, and you follow the rules. Because if you don't, you're gonna die. Tighten it up. Okay. So yeah, so we I worked in the oil field, and then for 3 weeks and spent about $1,000 moving my wife and child down there, and 6 weeks later we total depth and laid the rig down, and it never dug another foot, because that was when the farm economy was starting to bleed over into the rest of the economy. We stayed in Oklahoma for about another year, and then came back to Iowa. I've just been working a variety of different things. I always tell people I've spent the last 50 years trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up if I can't be a farmer.
I know a number of people like that, and not all of them get to be farmers. And
no, you don't, and that's the appropriate term: get to be farmer.
Yeah,
that's.
So so what was it like going to church as a father instead of going to church with a father? How did that change you?
I tried to age appropriately, but I tried to work as hard at making sure the kids were listening at least some of the time and getting something out of it, as my dad did when we were going to church.
Mm-hmm.
And because and that was even like when we went to catechism too. Dad always it wasn't that bad going to catechism. The bad part about catechism was the quiz we were getting when we got home. So yeah, just trying to I guess it isn't necessarily just part of going to church, but part of the life. I mean, my wife and I both come from families that have always traditionally had open doors and an extra chair at the table. And I saw a wide variety of people eat dinner with me, and my children have seen a wide variety of people eat dinner with them. And some of them were friends of ours, and some of them were people that we just happened to know about and needed a meal, But
Yep.
like Lori spoke to, every year because once my dad was gone, and when we were living back here at Kanawha, then and my brother was out in Illinois, then our family get-togethers, her folks very graciously always included my mother, and but there was always, a couple, three of the old bachelor guys from around town that didn't have family, didn't have place to go, and we've always tried to do that. And like when they had, I can't remember what the program was called, but there used to be a deal where there was foreign exchange students, college age people. We'd have an opportunity to go up and see a program about them, and then bring one home overnight. And so I remember we had one guy from Honduras, one guy from Guatemala, and I can't remember where the other one was from. But so my you try to take advantage of the relatively stable, sheltered environment you're raising them in, but you also are using that as a foundation for them to see and have opportunities to interact, know that there's a bigger world.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you first serve as an elder?
Probably about 2002 or 2003 at Wright, because when I was at Britt, the Christian school was going also, and my kids were Christian school. And so once if I was on Christian school board, I wouldn't do both. That was something my dad had shared with me before he passed. That he said he had done it like 1 or 2 years. He overlapped, and he said don't do it. Pick one and do that. So,
Yep. Yep.
but then so I don't know. Out of the last, I think I'd have to sit down and figure out exactly. I think probably somewhere around 15 or 16 out of the last 20 years I've been an elder, right?
Yeah, that's usually once you get in, they'll give you a year off between your terms just to get a breather, but they usually need elders pretty quick, and in you go again. And yeah, it was funny. When here at Living Stones, when I got here, we had a few more folks who had grown up CRC. And so if you grew up CRC, you sort of had an oral tradition about what's a deacon, what's an elder, and they're sort of used to that. But then when I was here, we were getting more and more people through who had never been a deacon before, never been an elder before. And it was always funny because at first the deacons were counting the money, and the deacons were taking the benevolence requests, and the deacons always kind of looked around and thought they're sort of busy. And they'd look at the elders and they'd see them, passing out communion, and they'd think, boy, those elders sure have it easy. They just sort of pass out communion whenever we have communion. And I'd always say to those deacons, I'd say, look, there are times when it looks like the elders don't have to do a whole lot, but when the elders have to get busy, it's not a lot of fun being an elder, because it means that there's trouble. And it's that kind of trouble that it's one thing to help somebody out with their electric bill or their rent or their food or something like that. It's another thing when you wade into a situation where something really important has broken, and you have the kind of mess around that nobody wants to see or live with, and that's where elders go. And so, when the elders don't have that, they get a nice breather, but when trouble does come, it's not fun trouble. So, and then often, as it turns out, deacons more often than not will then get their turn to be elders, and then they'll know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so I was in seminary in the late 80s, and the women in church office wars were going through. How did that hit the churches that you were participating in?
I think 5 or 6 years ago, Classes North Central finally agreed to allow women elders to attend class.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And how's that
my
gone?
um, okay. It's only happened like one or two times. It's not something. I think, you know what? I'm not 100% sure if there is any women elders right now. There has been,
Yeah.
but just I think in one or two churches,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so um, the the expressed opinion of the women in Right Church on this is that no, we're not. The men need to do something around here.
That is not the first time I have heard that.
So, but yeah, I my mom came out of the evangelical United Brother tradition, and I always uh, my parents were children of the Depression, and my dad was born in '08, and mom was born in '20, so it was they lived that,
Yep.
and mom would teach school for a year in country school, and then she'd say and live with her parents, and she have enough money to go to college for a year.
Yep.
But eventually, she finished up at Indiana Central in Indianapolis. And I'm going, why did you go out there? She says, because I was going to switch over to be a pre-sem.
Oh.
So in 42 or 43, my mother was going to be a preacher, and they they gave her a mentor. And after she had spent about 6 or 8 weeks with this mentor, she asked to be removed from the program because, whether accurately or not, she felt that having the position of the pastor had caused this woman to become a very unchristian person in the way she behaved, and the way she treated her husband, and the way she treated other people. And
wow.
Mom didn't think that was something you should take a chance on. That was interesting. My mother was one of the really strong people around here saying, no, don't do this. And she, and I mean, she was the first, I think she was the first person in her family to graduate high school. I know she was the first person to graduate college. When I was, in she quit teaching when she got married, because in them days you had to.
Yep.
And then later she took correspondence course and got her license again, and taught at the Christian school for a while. So I mean, it's not that this woman wasn't educated or wasn't aware, but she just, when it was all said and done, she said, no, this is not appropriate.
So what was your first experience at Synod like?
In 18, I started to get some glimmers. 22 was probably the first Synod where I thought that if God grants me to live my 80 years, that I will be buried as a member of the Christian Reformed Church. Because in '08, and for sure in 15, and to a certain extent in 18, I really felt that there was a pretty good possibility that before I died, Right Christian Reformed Church was going to be expelled from the Christian Reformed Church for not being liberal. Because wow. I mean, that was well, I don't know. Were you at any of the synods I was at?
I was at, I should write down what synods I was at. I was at 04. I might have been at 08 with you.
Because Will Reggie Smith and I were the only two guys wearing caps, because we didn't bring suit coats, and we were in there. So. And then that was also the one when Peter Bergdorf was trying to salvage the relationship with the church, with the mothership in the home country.
Oh, okay.
And that was my first beginning to understand that the tribe really was a competitor, and at times did trump theology in the Christian Reformed Church.
Okay.
And
what was, we were both at 22 then.
No, I was at 20. I was at 23 and 24.
Oh, 23
but I mean,
and 24.
what happened at 22 made me think,
okay.
oh,
yeah.
okay, we're finally finally going the right way.
Yeah. You made a speech at this synod, which I should probably. It's kind of a pain to go through the all of the hours of synod when you remember one thing, but you made a speech about guardrails that I thought was really important because I thought that I know at that point you're a little exacerbated, but but you made a point about guardrails. I don't know if you remember making that point, but I thought it was a really good one because I see that pattern. It's not just in the church, it's sort of in society where there's sort of a continual testing boundaries. And, you know, my mother would, my, my mother was a Frisian mother, and she was a pretty, she kept a pretty tight ship at home. And two of the three kids didn't test boundaries too much. The oldest one did a bit, and they'll probably both watch this video, so I got to watch what I say. But one of the things my mother would always say is that if you basically, I put it in more modern terms, if you enforce boundaries and let kids kind of know where the boundaries are, they're happier because they feel
Yeah.
secure and they feel like there's order in a place. And then, because so my father had a church in Paterson, New Jersey. It was, it was a very different place than Iowa, but my father he was born in Wisconsin, and then they went to Minnesota, Hancock, Minnesota, and then they went to Lighton, Iowa, and then he stayed on and finished his last year at Pella Christian. My grandfather took a call to Owen Sound, Ontario, and at that point, my father went to Calvin, and he eventually met my mother at Calvin. But so Paterson was a very different, inner city just outside of New York City, very different situation. And there are always kids around that, well, everywhere there are kids that are growing up in worse homes than better homes. And if those kids come into church, usually without their parents, some other adult's going to have to sort of help them figure out how to behave in church. And she'd always say, people seem to need to sort of know where their boundaries are. And once they figure out that, okay, these boundaries are enforced, then at least they know the lay of the land. They might not always like it, but at least they know it. And then most of them can sort of live with it. And so I thought I don't remember exactly how you said it, but I thought, yeah, there's a lot to that in terms of,
The
and I think
bad bratty baby boomer behavior of constantly banging against the guardrails.
that's exactly what it was. And you
Because
called out your own generation too.
Paul, it's our generation that drove this church in the ditch, and we
Mm,
need to be willing to help the people that are trying to get it back out.
mm. Yeah, yeah. And the baby boomers, I mean, they've had a big impact on American culture. They were such a large demographic, and so many of those changes, you know, a lot of those changes happened. I mean, in the 60s, the baby boomers were still pretty young, but a bunch of things just sort of caught momentum, and yeah, the world did change quite a bit. So where do you think well, any other recollections of these last two synods that you're pondering?
Um, I was on Committee 7 in 23, and that was an interesting experience. And I um, I view it a little bit differently now. I really felt that we really, as a group, really struggled to find exactly where we had to be and then stayed it. I have since seen a video of one of the people that was on that committee talking about their political plan for what was going to happen in that committee, and it didn't work the way they wanted it to. So that's that's the problem with being conservative is you tend to want to give everybody the benefit of a doubt, especially in a church situation, and we tend to get rolled. We tend to get rolled. I mean, it's just like that whole salvic issue, salvate, you know, that was originally introduced into the conversation of the church by the affirmers who are saying it's not a salvic issue. And yet somehow then the conservatives wind up having to try to defend it on the floor of Senate. We got rolled. But that's all right, because it's not about if we get rolled or we don't get rolled. It's about if God oversees the outcome. And if that involves us getting rolled, oh well. Yeah.
So what do you think happens next in the CRC?
I think that there's going to be some separation. I think there is probably going to be some readjustment in ministries, because I will be really surprised if we retain all of our staff. I think there will be staff that will have issues and decide that they're not going to be part of Christian Reformed Church anymore. So I think that there's going to be, I don't know, there's got to be a time of I think even though this has been, there's been a few wise people telling these people this was going to happen for 10 years now, and they wouldn't listen to you. I still think now that it's happened, we are going to have the grace to let them vent and whine and lie about us for a while yet. But there was 80 people at the last Abide convention. We happen to be standing where the majority of the denomination was already at, and we spoke a little bit.
Yeah.
And because they can't accept that that's where the denomination is at, then they have to gin us up into this Trumpian monolith, which I would dare say that the vast majority of the congregations in the North Christian Reformed Church in North America have nobody that has any association with Abide.
No, that's very true.
Yeah. It's just, it's their straw man, it's their dummy, it's their excuse. And they could quit sometime now. It'd be all
right. Yeah.
But I think that, they're going to have to figure out where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And we need to help them and be gracious. And I think that, I know for myself, I am still, if I pray that God will grant me to see us all together yet before I die.
Yeah. Do you think?
I really do. And I think it could happen. I mean, that it's not, the only thing we can do about it is be gracious, because it's a heart and mind issue, and all the arguments have been made. Either their hearts are going to be changed or they aren't, and that's not going to be. We've got nothing to do with that except to be faithfully praying for them and with them as we have opportunity.
Do you think? Go ahead.
And I think the other thing is that we as congregations, as leaders, we really are going to have to get a lot more intentionally confessional. And it's not like it's not some big campaign or anything, but it's just like, since Synod, then the consensus at our church was, okay, we're going to start. We're right now, our Sunday evening Bible study, we're working our way through Guido de Bray and the Belgian Confession. And because there is, there's even secular works that have stood the test of time, that people still come back to them hundreds and maybe even a few thousand years later. And don't think it's being arrogant or unreasonable to think that even some Dutchmen might have wrote something in the 400 or 500 years ago that is still worth paying attention to, you know. So,
um, do you think there'll be any changes in, I mean, do you think with this decision now, things in your classes will pretty much stay out as they've been? You're not anticipating any big changes in your classes?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Actually, we have an RCA church that is probably going to join our classes at our next classes meeting because they just is a little more, which I say a little more, but a little more drama involved in art and kingdom and some of that stuff than there is with what we've had going. So.
Yep. Yep. And anything you wanted to talk about or say that I haven't sort of asked you about? I don't want to curtail.
I guess, well, I guess I want to, I guess I would challenge all the people from your age through my age through 10 years older to really, and I'm not going to intent here, because that's one thing. I don't know if you ever read that Boomer book I told you about, but that lady too, she does not go to intent that we intended to make such a mess of things. And sometimes it was our best intentions that made the messes.
Yeah.
But we still need to be realistic and honest about whether we intended it or not, whether it was on purpose or not. We do have to deal with the reality that it is a mess. And I think that we are blessed right now in our denomination to have a pretty good bunch of good young people that have the ambition and energy we had 20, 30 years ago, and to get this going on the right direction and to keep us going on the right direction. And I think we not only need to not get in their way, but we need to see whatever we can do to help.
Okay. Okay.
And it just that's been I guess that's what I think is going to make the difference here. And I think also by going along and helping, because the danger I see is there are people on both sides that saw this as a battle, and we have to, if it was a battle, we have to recognize that it's over and make sure we don't start fighting with each other just to keep being warriors. That that Ecclesiastes, there's a time for war, and now there's a time for peace.
Okay. All right. All right. You got any questions for me before we land the plane?
Not really. I just I enjoy you. You gave me an incredible ability to understand that I will probably never understand what it's really like to grow up in Western Michigan.
I didn't grow up in Western Michigan.
No,
I grew up in New Jersey.
But those are your people. You said that yourself. Those are your people.
In many ways.
And it has made me feel so blessed that I grew up where I grew up. There was never any confusion about what was the church, what was the town of Kanawha, what was the community, what was, that was these spheres all interacted, but we all recognized that they were separate and distinct spheres that interacted. And we never, I don't think we ever got confused. I mean, there was even within our families, as I was growing, there was some of my cousins that they didn't come to Grandpa's for a couple months because Grandpa had told them, no, you're not welcome here right now. Mm-hmm. Even though you're family, you're not, if you want to come and visit with me, you can come and visit with me, but you're not coming to the family gatherings at my house. Right? Mm-hmm. And so I am this, I guess one thing this experience has done is made me incredibly grateful that I got the privilege of growing up out in the middle of nowhere in Iowa.
Oh, that's beautiful. Maybe that's a great way to close, because there are few things, there are few things better than to one of my grandfather's favorite passages was the Psalm where he would say, "My boundary markers have fallen in pleasant places." And
Yes,
um and
yes,
that's a
yes.
beautiful thing to say.
Psalm 13, all the
Yep.
struggles first, but at the end, uh, uh, Joe Walsh almost had it right. Not life's been good.
Yeah,
God's been good.
that's right. That's Well, Herb, this has certainly been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this, and I pray that God continues to bless you and your family, and especially your. We'll see once this goes out. There might be someone in the area that says, "Well, I'd like to help Herb take apart his house." I mean, you never know. That happens
Yeah.
sometimes. So if anybody
Well,
out
just
there wants to, when Herb's all set, moving into the
yeah.
other place, help him take apart the house, I'll hook you up.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for the work you do to help facilitate communication and understanding in the body of God.
all right. Well, thank you, Herb. Well, you have a pleasant evening.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.